welcome. I'm Angie Doran from Homes England, and I am chairing this session today on self and custom build and good design principles. So we are the Local Government Capacity Centre, and this is a description of what the Local Government Capacity Centre does. We are here to support you. Next slide, please. And we have various offerings. We run these learning programs where we actually have back sessions available to look at on YouTube. So if there's anything of interest, check it out, and you can actually check on our other sessions that we've had in the past. We also have a housing information hub, which provides resource, and that's available on gov.uk. We also provide fact sheets as well to support local authorities, and we have a very exciting capacity analysis tool as well, which is directly usable by local authorities to assess capacity within their own organisations. Next slide, please. So this is today's agenda. I will be passing on in a few minutes to Honoré van Rijsbach, who is the founder of Collective Urban Strategies, and he'll be talking you through how to design self and custom build communities. And then he will be passing on to Julian Owen, who's the managing director of Julian Owen Associate Architects, who will be describing how custom and self build can achieve good design. Then we will have about 20 minutes, and we've got 30 minutes for each presentation, roughly. Then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A, and as I said, we'll be monitoring your questions throughout the presentations. And then we will close probably for about 12 p.m, all going well. Next slide, please. So I'm Angie Doran, and I head up Homes England's Self-Commissioned Homes Unit. We were set up about 2 years ago, and we are here to support local authorities and to try and scale up more housing in this sector. Next slide, please. So self-commissioned covers self-build and custom build, which are both obviously being discussed today. We also cover all forms of community-led housing, so from CLTs to co-housing to housing co-ops, and we're here to help. So if there's anything you would like to find out about what the unit does, or if there's any way we can support you, then please do reach out after the session, and we can start the conversation there with the unit. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pass on to Honoré now, who will talk you through how to design self and custom build communities. Thank you.
Good morning, Angie. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Honoré van Rijsbach. I've been introduced already, but I would also like to mention I'm founder of Collective Urban Strategies, but also I'm a member of the Right to Build Task Force. Next one, please. And what is important, sorry, can we go one back? What is important is important as a studio. We are reimagining self and custom built communities, and with the intention to inspire people to share more time together and to reconnect to the natural and built environment. These are the kind of drivers for all the projects we are involved in. Next one, please. And I think what's important, and especially a couple of years ago when I was running workshops for the task force, this question of how would you like to live, and when we were in lockdown and we all asked ourselves these questions, and I think we should continue asking us these questions. Next one, please. And what you see, unfortunately, what is happening across the UK is communities built or comparable, as you can see on the screen now. They are quite car dominated and tarmac dominated, and often there's a lack of variation and choice. Next one. And what we think is that actually what we see is that the communities we are involved in, the self and custom built communities, they offer something much richer at the moment. There's a diverse offer of homes and spaces. It's often orientated around walking and cycling. And this, as an example, this is a project in New Leiden, a quite urban custom and self-built project. And actually, if you see back now, 5-10 years later, when it's delivered, that there's very high spatial, social, economic values. This neighborhood is very popular. Next one. And what I would like to do today, as a designer, as an urban designer, to share some of these design principles and to kind of bring these kind of to share some of these principles. Next one, please. And I think what's interesting, when I was asked that question, how to design self and custom built communities, next one, what you can see is actually that very often there are comparable kind of aspects to it. If it's a custom self-built community, or it is a more traditional mainstream a neighborhood community, it is about character, it's about appearance, it's about movement, access, scale, messing, capacity, and mix. Next one. But I would like to highlight a couple of aspects who are specifically, I think, relevant for custom and self-built. And one of them is to transfer responsibilities. Next one, please. And this is a site visit. This was an open day in Orchard Farm in Ashford. And actually, what you can see is that the self-builders were visiting the site. And they walked around, and actually it was really very much about sharing what their expectations are and intentions are when they buy a plot and what kind of house they would like to live. Next one, please. And also it's important if it's a self-built and custom-built projects that the self-builders and custom builders will be in charge early in the design process. Next one. And this is a really exciting project. This is new ground. This is an old women's co-housing group. The OWCH linked and worked together with the Housing for Women Association and Housing Association, and they delivered their own kind of. They decided to buy this site with the Housing Association and to deliver these homes for themselves. And not only the homes, they also thought about these communal spaces, their internal and external, they would share with each other. Next one. The second aspect is to design a coherent master plan. Next one. And what is a coherent master plan, and what's the reason for it? It's almost like a bookshelf where there's a clear framework where lots of different books could be structured. Variation could be exist within it. And this is a project in Almere, a very clear urban structure with lanes and water body within the center of this detached home development. Next one. And you can see the kind of elements, the lanes. Next one, please. And of course, the water body. And then within that, each of these houses have their own character and their own style. Next one. Just design a coherent landscape-led master plan is actually a way to accommodate the diversity, what you often see in custom and self-built, and actually where you're aiming for. Next one. This is a project in Orchard Farm. This is a project I have been working on for about 3 to 4 years. But again, it's really about getting that framework, that bookshelf in place. Next one, please. And then the plots and the houses will follow and will form that community. Next one. Initiate choice and freedom. And this is already mentioned by me, but that is almost like the kind of the essence of custom and self-built. Creating that opportunity. Next one. And also accommodate this the challenge and the opportunity is to really also find ways to accommodate this choice and freedom within the planning and development process. This is Koendersbuurt in Delft. Minimum set of regulations. It's not driven by architectural style, as you can see, and it's and there's a free, but there are some regulations in place. And it's the freedom of materials, roofscapes, and color palette. Next one. This is really about limiting the planning policies, the design codes, and the regulations. It's a different mindset. It's not about control, it's about limitations. Limited and reduce the policies. Next one. And also, I mean, this is a project in Oosterwold, but you can see them across different parts of the Netherlands and also in the UK. It's actually also allowed for specials. There are maybe certain plots where you allow for total freedom. There's very limited planning of no planning restrictions. And this really encourages innovation and experimentation, as you can see here. Next one. But depending on the context, maybe sometimes that's not what you allow for. And here, this is a project from the 90s, very famous, Borneo Sporenburg in Amsterdam. And there, the order, the rhythm, and the cohesion was very relevant. But still, there was a variation in materials and in architecture style. And inspired by the historical city center of Amsterdam. There's a reference to the past. Next one. And then we talk about buildings quite often, but actually to diversify the open space is very important. Next one. So instead of what we see sometimes is that the cul-de-sac is the kind of open space, the outdoor space, but actually there is so much history in the UK about outdoor spaces. You can have avenues, terraces, streets, lanes, passages, rows, mews, gates, squares. There's multiple approaches you can have, multiple spaces you can include and integrate within in custom and self-built neighborhoods. Next one. And this is an example. This is the lane. This is almost like a transitional experience whereby the lane is connecting all these different outdoor spaces with different characteristics. Next one. And again, these are these different landscapes. They are part of the urban development, the neighborhood, the design of the master plan. Next one. And it's bringing it all together. Yeah, dus the lane is connecting all these different spaces. Next one, please. In addition, another aspect is really like upfront to think about how you initiate these social connections. Next one. And this is a project in Herne Bay. It was a small, quick study, and really thinking about how could that customer self-built community settle down within an existing building block, and really starting with this communal central green space, and to encourage activation and to introduce a mix of house types. Next one. And you can see the different house types. Yeah, next. Takes a little while. The next one is a heart of the green community. It's an orchard farm, but again, the neighborhood has been designed around these spaces. Next one, please. And it's really about, we believe it's really about, not about service plots on a piece of land. It's really about this additional quality and values to inspire people to share more time together. You know, locating benches in the right location and tables, finding continuous walking and cycle routes through the site. Even if it's a very small site for up to 10 homes, it's part of a bigger landscape, a part of a bigger territory. Next one. And introduce multiple house types. And this is also something, it's important. Very often the reference is the 4 or 5 bedroom houses, but actually custom and self-built is much richer than that. And I will show very quickly a couple of examples. Next one. And this is what you see, the tiny house. It started in Almere. In the Netherlands, you see it across the Netherlands. You see now examples of communities of tiny houses where starters and downsizers could build a small house up to 50 square meters. Next one. With the Right to Build task force, we visited We Can Make. Very inspiring. Community Land Trust. They are specifically focusing also on affordable micro homes or micro sites. And they are scaling up at the moment across Bristol and further out. Next one. And we go quite quickly. Seagull Close, 1970s, council-run scheme. The residents built their affordable homes and really finding accessible construction techniques and materials. And at the moment we see WikiHouse doing something comparable across Europe. Next one. Central Island, 1,500 homes, all custom and self-built. Also a much wider range of house types, and also more the urban house types, more higher density. Next one. And one of them is the Warren Center Island. It's a co-housing scheme. It's about 36 flats. And the residents have come together and they decided it's not only about our flats. We also 30% of the total floor plan is allocated for collective spaces. We also want to have a building that is using recycled materials and is very efficient with energy use. Next one. It's with custom and self-built. You can build these inclusive and diverse custom-built communities. It's not only about the 4 or 5 bedroom houses. Next one. And then I want to talk about design codes and plot passports, and it's quite a rapid moving presentation, because I would like to show many examples. But the design codes are really effective tool for custom and self-built, and it allows for a more dynamic design and planning process. It can be very controlled, it could be less controlled, but it allows to be more dynamic. Next one. And I will go through the definition of it, and I will talk about a few steps, how to deliver them based on experience I have delivering design codes across different sites. What are design codes? Next one. They are a set of concise, measurable and visual regulations. Next one. And this is the National Model Design Code. If you would like to find more detail about it, I would really recommend to look at it, download the document. It's focused around climate, character and community, and it's really bringing all the details of design codes together. Next one. But if you can see, this is an example of Treverson Park South. The codes are really defining in very much detail the aspects of the buildings. They could define some of the aspects of the buildings, but what we shouldn't forget that also these design codes could define the outdoor space and then the characteristics, the dimensions, etc. Next one. And this is an example. I think it's very clear. You can see there's a design code in place where there's a maximum height. There's a way of fronting this water. But then within that, you can see there's lots of variation and possibilities within the building envelope. Next one. Why introduce design codes? Next one. And I think it's actually, partly design codes also to avoid undesirable outcomes. They have that kind of aspect as well. Next one. But it's also to guide the design process and to promote high quality design. It's much more from an opportunity point of view than a restrictive point of view. Next one. And this is an example in the Netherlands, small community and up to 50 plots, just for self-built plots, just in a small community. There's nothing special about it. It's just happening at the moment across many parts of the Netherlands and in Europe. Next one. And the key thing is to rationalize and optimize the design code can to rationalize and optimize the planning and development process. Next one. Who delivers the design codes? Next one. And I think they should be delivered. Of course, maybe the designer is bringing the design codes together, but they are brought together with next one. They are brought together with a much wider group. It's the landowners, the developers, the enablers, the authorities, and also the local communities, or maybe the self-builders. They could be involved at an early stage to find out what is what they are looking for. Next one. And where introduce design codes? Next one. And this again, I refer back to the National Model Design Code. They could be the design codes, and that there are all kind of pilot projects already delivered. They could be delivered across the different characteristic areas across the different areas. Next one. When to prepare a design code? Next one, please. I think it's important that that would start at a very early stage. Next one. Very early stage of the design process, almost like maybe in parallel with developing the vision. Next one. And how to deliver design codes. Next one, please. Is to capture the vision. Next one. To develop a holistic vision for the community and for the self and custom built community. Next one, please. And it's very much, for this case in Orchard Farm, I was involved in the initial stage of developing it, and it was the kind of, the vision was very focused around 4 elements. It was living with nature, share and connect, an active landscape, and homes for all. Quite still abstract objectives, but they fed into the design codes. Next one. This the design principles. They should be imaginative and effective. Design, yeah, next one, please. They should be imaginative and effective to design principles form the vision. Next one. And this is just an example, but actually they start with quite almost on a principle level, and then they will translate in more spatial kind of codes, who are more specific for the community. Next one, please. And how you formulate the design codes. Next one. It's identify future spatial characteristics, its conditions and its ambitions. Next one, please. And then just a few examples. The design codes, you could introduce the shared lanes to move and socialize. That could be part of the design code. Next one. The intentions. It could initiate an active natural front gardens. Next one. It could allow the community to activate courtyards. Next one. But also it could, one of the design codes could be to maximize the biodiversity at multiple skills within the community. Next one. And often we see, of course, to introduce the site-specific details and materials in relation to the buildings, but again, also within the outdoor areas, outdoor spaces. They could be part of the design code, and it could be more kind of fixed and become part of the design and planning process. Next one. How to define and review. Next one, please. It's really in dialogue. So what is the dialogue with the stakeholders? Next one. But it's important. I think it should start across the preparing the design code. It's across the different stages, and it should be an iterative design and planning process. So it's going backwards and forwards very early, also early in the design process. Next one. And to visualize an order. Next. It's to organize the design codes by site area, characteristics, and teams. So how do you bring them together in a document? This is, next slide, please. And then this is done here. This is an example for Orchard Farm, where we developed the design codes, the vision, the master plans, the principles, the design codes, where all the different aspects are coming together instead of layout and skill, and then the 4 landscapes. That's the structure we introduced specifically for this project. Next one. Final one, and I will keep it under the next 10 minutes minimum, is the plot maximum is the plot passports. And this is a really important, the plot passport is to provide clarity, certainty, and guidance for the self-builders. It's a very important tool, specifically for self and custom build. Next one. What is a plot passport? Next one. This is an example of a plot what still needs to be developed. And the plot passport is almost describing these regulations specifically for this piece of land. Next one. A concise summary of the individual plot parameters and regulations. Next one. And this is an example also, a study we did, a design study for Bamber Bridge. Each of these plots will have a plot passport. It's across multiple house types, and it's taking in consideration the regulations, its specific location within the site. If it's on the green, if it's on the railway line, each of these characteristics will be translated in the regulations. Next one. And it's about plot dimensions, it's about building regulations, it's about land use, materials, procurement, planning and sales process. All different aspects will coming back. Next one. And why would you introduce a plot passport? I mean, it's always good to ask that question. Yeah. Next one. And the plot passport plays a significant role in the design, planning and sales process for self and custom build. Next one. For Graven Hill, you can see they have been experienced for almost a decade. Next one, please. And they really find a way to optimize that process with the plot passport planning process as well. 28 days to get permission. Next one. And this could also be delivered at scale. This is the bonework. That could be up to 500 homes with service plots. Up to 500, and each will be delivered and developed and sold with a plot passport. Next, please. Plot passports provide the opportunity for individuals and groups to build their dream home. It's not about restrictions only and limitation. It's about creating opportunity for individuals and groups. And I think that's a really important way to look at it. Next one, please. Who delivers the plot passport? Next one. It's investors, developers, enablers, and local authorities, and very often in partnership. Next one. And of course, what I think is interesting, this is an overview of national overview of where are these plots available and at what price. And in the UK, there's Plot Finder. There are different organizations for bringing these plots together. Next one. Where introduce plot passports? Next one. I mean, this could be, next one, please. This could be across about different urban areas, suburban, rural areas, and across, of course, different house types. Next one. And when to prepare a plot passport. Yeah, can I have next one? It could be prepared it should be prepared at an early stage of the design and development process, probably shortly after when the design codes are developed. The plot passports go in, or maybe maybe halfway the process of the design codes, and they kind of they are developed at the same time because they have a strong relation with each other. Next one. How to deliver a plot passport. Next. Couple of stages. You identify the design approach, the overall design approach. Next one. Identify the design approach informed by the vision, the design principles and the codes, the design codes we talked about before. Next one. Finalize the master plan. Next one, please. And develop a plot by plot master plan and introduce multiple types of homes or tenures and plot conditions. Next one. And this is an example of a study we did, the paper mill in Birmingham, existing houses and new developments, and parceled up in plots, each of them with a plot passport. It could be delivered over time, a landscape led master plan, and really the intention was to maximize choice and variation in the way the plots are planned and designed within the site. Next one, please. Formulate plot regulations. The master plan is there. The next step is to formulate the plot regulations, is to capture the site-specific regulation for each of the plots in relation to the overall master plan and the design codes. Next one. And here are a few examples. Within the plot master, you can define what the plot boundaries are and the materiality, if that's relevant and important. Next one. The variation and the orientation, the messing and the materials, specifically for each of these plots, and maybe in relation to its context. Say here, this water body. Next one. Introduce cohesion and variation. And in this example, in a small community, the roofscapes are fixed, but the materials are more flexible. And again, this is the cohesion and variation what will come in. And again, each project you have to define that, and that can be defined in the plot passports in more detail. Next one. Consisting building height and materials, that could be an aspect what is translated in the plot passports as well. Next one. Or the building line, the height, but also the active frontage. And the active frontage, I think, is very important. In this case, is the project in New Leiden, where there's it was important as a guideline that there was an active relation with the street and the building and the house on the corner, not only on ground floor, but also on first floor and second floor. Next one. To review, test, and refine. Next one. And again, this is comparable as the design code. It should be happening at all stages, the development of the plot passport, early in the design process, and it should be an iterative design and planning process in line and in conversation with all the stakeholders. Next one. Is to visualize the plot regulations. Next one. Is to draw the plot conditions, the location, the dimensions, and the building regulations. Next one. And this is an example of a plot passport. I think it's important, having been worked also with a Dutch client for many years. It's just a 2-page document with a title, a name of the plot, some specific aspects of the plot area, the plot price, a drawing, setting out what the rules are of the plot, an overview, and then planning regulations and legal regulations. Next one. And then I want to wrap up before I pass on to Julian Owen, my colleague in the Right to Build task force. I just have a couple of recommendations I've mentioned before. I just mentioned them again. Next one. It's really important to capture that vision. Start with the vision for this new community. If you want to reimagine custom and self-build, start with the vision and translate that through the design codes and the plot passports. Allow to develop the design codes and the plot passport in an iterative way and allow for participation as well. So all the kind of ideas and feedback will come together and are translated within these 2 very important documents. And finally, I don't think it's about drawing plots on a piece of land. It's really like we should have a bigger aim with these self-built communities, custom-built communities, is reconnect people together and also reconnect them to the natural and built environment. Next one. And then I would say, if there's any questions, please let me know. My email address is here, my telephone number, and I look forward to hear from you. And I will pass on to Julian.
Okay, thanks, Honoré. I always start any of this kind of talk with just pointing out this is not about grand designs. Well, I suppose it's a bit about grand designs, but it's mostly about the objective here is getting regular homes for regular people. The ultimate case should be that if someone can afford a house, whether it's a rental or it's buying on the market, they should have the opportunity to take part in custom and self-build. We're a long way off that. We're talking about a culture change here, but I think it's worth making that point. It's not about huge, expensive houses for wealthy people. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of the secret of getting the design process to work is it comes down to the detail and how you go through this process, which Honoré has started to explain to you. So it's a different mindset to how buildings in our built environment is created. So in order to achieve what we want to achieve with custom and self-build, there's less standardization in that it's not all coming from one mind, one designer or architect. There's diversity. Individual homes get individual attention. So instead of it being one among hundreds or even thousands, people are working very intensely on their own designs. And that inevitably, in my opinion, results in better buildings, designed and built. There has to be input from the community as well. That's an important element of custom and self-build. And we're talking about things coming from the bottom up. Our planning system in this country is mainly top down, not just the planners, but the developers as well. But given all that, it's still important that the council keep a control, the approving authority, keep a control over how the design develops and make sure it doesn't go totally awry. Can I have the next slide, please? So in this section, I'm going to talk about the design process. I'm going to talk about how you can deliver that good design, how custom self-build helps you to comply with policy, how you can help self-builders, and some case studies at the end. Next slide, please. I don't know whether Christopher Alexander is a thing these days, but he was a writer in the 70s and he had some very interesting ideas. Don't agree with all of it, but some of it was really has an effect on what we're talking about here, because his idea was that the users are more sensitive to their needs than any planner or architect can be. And his concept was that you set out rules, just like we've been talking about, and then the precise nature of how those rules are interpreted comes down to the individual. So final decisions about the buildings and materials and finishes and stuff like that all happen based on the individuals creating their own environment. And although it was written in the 70s, apparently this kind of thinking, the people who invented Wikipedia say it had a big effect on how they developed Wikipedia, the concept of people doing stuff for themselves. Next slide, please. So an important principle with custom self-built is choice and diversity. So it's really, when you think who designs new housing estates at the moment, one or two, a small group of architects. But collectively, self-built homes are going to be better, and they're going to be better designed and built because they have that individual attention. Custom and self-built allows communities, regular homeowners and tenants, crucially, the opportunity to become directly involved in the design of their homes and their built environment. So the result of that is you have more diversity, more ideas, more creativity, and stronger communities. It's also an opportunity for innovation, things like energy efficiency and MMC, modern methods of construction. And again, it comes back to the balance, which is the job of the local authorities to strike that balance between individual kind of freedom and making sure that the whole thing locks together. Could I have the next slide, please? So there are a lot of benefits to the community with this. As I've said, sustainability, energy efficiency, accessibility, in not just in getting into the building, but making things available to people. And the community builds as the buildings do. The community is usually created before the buildings actually appear. That results in pride and ownership by the local community who are created. It supports the local economy. Small and medium-sized businesses benefit enormously. There's less controversy because a self-build site that involves the community is less likely to have protests when a new site is announced. And a big thing with architects at the moment is called contemporary vernacular, in other words, a modern interpretation of local needs, and it fits that perfectly. Next slide, please. So if you're going to try and deliver this, there are a number of controls and methods and ways of doing it. One is planning obligations, which I don't know, some of you may be very familiar with 106 and unilateral undertakings and that kind of thing. So that's making sure that the delivery is effective and well managed, and crucially is genuinely custom and self-build, because some people do try to get around that particular requirement, some of the developers. And so there is a structure. Most multi-plot sites certainly need these kind of things built in, controls and dates for completion and stuff like that. Planning conditions, again, quite often those involve the design codes and plot passports that Honoré was talking about. And as part of that, it should be built in that there's evidence that it is a self-build scheme and not something that's just been put on there to hopefully get permission they might not otherwise get. And that follows from that. You also need to make sure that you're monitoring things quite closely on site, and that there's a process for doing that. Not for the local authority to do. The custom build enabling organisation should do that for you. Could I have the next slide, please? So when it comes to approaching how you get people to comply and control the process, first thing is to set priorities for an area and concentrate on what those are. In other words, it depends on the context, whether it's a very sensitive site or whether it's a site where there are less sensitive issues or heritage issues and stuff like that. So that you have to decide what's important in terms of the design context. So the starting point should be give as much freedom as you can to people to do their own thing, and then you decide the level of control that goes alongside that, and that will differ according to where the site is and what your priorities are. So the design code is a function, an end result of that process, deciding what's important and then deciding what isn't as important and give you more freedom. The other thing is that a crucial part of this in terms of delivering is to streamline the process. And hopefully I can show you some examples where that happened a bit later on. And there's monitoring, as I've already said. So you need to make sure there's a process on site that's locked in, that makes sure that they're custom self-build, but also that they're managed effectively. And the end result of that is if the project ends up looking like a regular housing estate, then it's failed. Basically, it should look different. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to talk very briefly about national planning policy and how self-build will fit in with that. It does get a bit of a mention, custom and self-build, in the national planning policy framework. And it talks about a number of good things that we should be doing, tailoring controls to local circumstances, high quality sustainable buildings, engagement with the communities, etc. I'm not sure how much of that actually in the end happens with the large housing estates, frankly, but it's something to aim for. And custom and self-build, as I'm hoping I will show you, actually will achieve that. Next slide, please. You might be familiar, I think Honoré may have shown this earlier on, the roundel from the National Design Guide. This sets out the context and what the priorities are when it comes to developing our environment and new buildings and when we're creating new places. And it sets out the priorities. I think custom and self-build sits neatly in about 8 of those. Next slide, please. Just going to. So context, given the right mechanisms of control, you can put in place either very tight control or you can relax that control. And it's all about appropriateness. So you can fine tune how the custom self-build project develops and how much freedom people have. The identity side of it is it's almost built into the process, because if you have new residents many of whom often live locally anyway, and they create the development together, as I will hopefully show you shortly with some examples. Next slide, please. So built form. Housing estates in my experience, tend to lack variety that you need, and although they try very hard, there is a lack of sense of space quite often. Of belonging, and I think custom build actually gives you that, because you get that kind of diversity and interest and unexpected buildings quite often. The nature side of it is quite interesting, because again, this is about ownership, because especially the collective schemes, I've got an example to show you later, they have an ownership of the landscape in a way that quite often standard house schemes don't. And it's all about community and sharing and stuff like that. And the other thing is that community development or community-led development, which results in custom build projects, people who are attracted to those tend to be quite inclusive and altruistic. And if they have a bit of control, they can do some great things. Next slide, please. Functional, healthy, sustainable. Well, in my experience, all self-builders are looking for this, and it's not necessarily a financial thing at all. It's not a case of doing the minimum in order to get the thing through planning and building regs. They have a deep interest in making sure that those things are achieved with their buildings. Particularly sustainability is a big thing, which is why I was putting in heat pumps and stuff like that, solar panels in the mid 1990s. Next slide, please. And self-builds have always been more energy efficient in my direct experience, because people that are building them are going to live there and they want their heating bills to a minimum. And I could give you plenty of examples where, I mean, the one at the bottom there in the middle, the autonomous house, where that was done about 30 years ago as a self-build, and it was kind of free of the grid. It didn't need any extra power in order to run it. Next slide, please. Again, this is about individual attention on properties, making sure they're built with love and care and attention, and no corners are cut where someone is managing or building their own project. They want it to be good and they want it to work. So they put a level of attention into what they're doing, and they have standards which really aren't made in a kind of, I suppose, financial way. They're thinking, well, if we're going to live here for maybe 10, 20 years or longer, we want it built properly, and they do last. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of councils, just to point you in direction, if you want to see some really good examples, one of the stars is South Gloucestershire Council, because they have grasped the issue very firmly and put into place various mechanisms to help custom and self-build and make it work properly. They've spent some real time looking at this. So obviously they have a local plan which requires things generally, but they have looked at how custom and self-build can specifically help them achieve the objectives of their local plan. So it's all integrated. Their policy for custom and self-build works very well with the local plan and the core strategy and other things. And they've included in the stuff that they provide typical design codes and plot passports, which, so if you're looking to see how it's done, they are a very good place to look. And one of the things they do, they have a sort of partnership with local landowners, developers, and self-build enablers, who are people who make these things happen on the ground. Next slide, please. So they have an SPD, and it's an excellent document. It goes into all the background. It describes how they are aiming to meet local and national policy. It shows how you achieve good design, particularly where you have a big site and then there's a small corner of it which is going to be for self-builders, and there's certain issues between the big developers and getting in people who will enable a smaller part of that development to work well. And again, very good advice there you'll find if you go to their website on plot passports and design codes. Next slide, please. This is their partnership arrangement, which I don't know whether any others have done it, but it's the only one I'm aware of. It's certainly worth looking at and seeing how, if you want to get custom and self-build really working well and control that process, this is the way to do it. So basically they have arrangements, and they have kind of people or organizations and companies that are interested in custom self-build and help them achieve that and make sure that they're working together with those organizations. Next slide, please. I won't go into the detail of this, but it's really setting out how that process works, how people, organizations, companies, communities who are interested in following this up can work with the council, how that whole process will work. And say that they've really done some great work on that. Next slide, please. Another one which is worth looking at is Tynebridge District Council down in the southwest. They are in the vanguard, so they were brave and they went in first almost, and a lot of the stuff and they've learned a lot. So again, it's worth looking at some of the schemes they've done to find out how to do it, and maybe some of the things to try to avoid all the issues that need to be dealt with to make a scheme work well with a council. Next slide, please. So making it happen on the ground, and that's a challenge because, again, it's a cultural thing. We're not used to it in this country, and there's a lot of things to be learned and things that need to be put in place to make it work well. So I expect many of you are familiar with construction method statements, which can be put into the planning process and can be left so that the council can approve them. I mean, having said that, I'm not sure that you guys, the planners, ever read them in detail, because I've never had one questioned. But it should be scrutinised, particularly with custom self-build. How's it going to work on site? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to make sure things are done properly? And part of the process of making it work well is that the local authority has to work with the custom build enabling developer to get decisions through quickly. And if it's set up correctly and you've got things like the design codes and the plot passports and things that Honoré was talking about, if those are done well and you work together well with people like South Gloucester do, then you can make decisions very much quicker. And that's very important for the project to succeed. Specifically on site, custom self-build enablers, they have a role to play which is very important. Apart from setting up the project, they also can take on the role of site management, things like CDM, which I know people worry about, and how's it going to work, how are we going to make sure people finish things on time and it's not a permanent building site. All those aspects are managed by the custom build enabling company, and obviously the local authority has oversight over that and approves the processes, but that's essentially it's their job to make sure those kind of things go well. Next slide, please. Right, some examples. This one is in Leeds. It's in Chapeltown. I suppose it's what would be called a deprived area. I'm not sure they would like it described like that exactly, but it's an area where people don't have a lot of money. And the importance of this scheme to me is what they've achieved is a community-led project. So what those pictures you're looking at, that's the scheme. But it was initiated and controlled by the community. So it has a mix of different types of tenure. So you've got 1-bed, 4-bed flats, HMOs. There's guest rooms, there's a common house, which is where they all meet up and they share meals there twice a week. Interestingly, and this seems to come up a lot, it was an undesirable site in many ways, right next to a main road in Leeds, not particularly attractive to a developer. The council owned it, I think, which is how they got hold of it. And it's been designed as a shared space. So what you're looking at those pictures is the one on the top right and bottom left. That's a community area. And what's interesting is that they have a certain amount of proper or land of the landscaping which officially is theirs, but what happens is the community have taken ownership of the whole space, so they manage it. There's an allotment area there. It's very secure because it's a courtyard which is in the middle surrounded by houses. So that's an important part of it, that the community have ownership of the project. And it's run by a community land trust. I think it's community land trust. And they deliberately have selected people to join the co-op, actually, who are running it. The people to join, they decide by committee collectively, and a very important part of their policy was to get a really good mix of people. So it's very inclusive, LGBT, different races and ethnic origins and everything else. And they created this property collectively. So all the decisions, all the important decisions were made by the community. Right. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is an allocation on a much larger site, which is in York. And that's something that York Council have been working on for a while now. And it's got 6 self-build sites. And out of those, I think they've all been built now. There's also an adjoining site which is going to be used for, excuse me, by another firm. So I'm just sorry, just have an IT failure here, which we will sort out in just one second. There we go. Sorry about this. Just checking my notes, making sure I've got them all in the right place. Right, here we go. Apologies for that. Lowfield Green, it's led by City Council. The York City Council own the land. There's 19 co-housing opportunities, the 6 self-build plots. There's a mix, market, shared equity, social housing on the site. There are a lot of constraints, and it was put together because they realized there was demand for self-build and community self-build, and that therefore they wanted to make sure that happened, and that's what the local authority did. Next slide, please. This is joining that site I've just shown you, the 6 self-builds, and this is a community land trust called Your Space. Forgive the pun, really. And it's basically, the idea here is that a group have got together. They acquired the land through the local authority. And I think originally it was started by 2 tenants or residents who live locally, and they were caught in a rent trap. They couldn't afford a house. It was too expensive, basically paying rent. They couldn't get a deposit together. They say they have 3 vital principles with this, which is affordability, sustainability, and community. Interestingly, because someone asked about cars earlier on, parking, they have an obligatory car sharing scheme. So if you want to be part of this community and live there, you have to sign up to a car share. That means that there's less demand for parking spaces because everyone is sharing cars collectively. So I think there's 19 units of all varying sizes, but actually there will only be 12 car spaces. So this is, this is the community in action, I think you'd call it. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's the community. And as you can see, there's a variety of people who are involved in this project. They're all very keen and enthusiastic. Next slide, please. Now, this is another contrast. This is co-housing, which is set up slightly differently to some of the others. This, again, was an undesirable site that people didn't want. It was a reservoir. It had a steep slope across it. So in some ways, it was quite an unattractive site. But what happened was people, again, got together and decided that they could do a project here. So there's 12 self-builds, which were self-finished, and there's 12 custom-build flats where a developer kind of finished it off according to people's individual needs. So there's a mix of properties here, from 1-bed studios to larger houses. There's a real good community mix. It was conceived as purely self-build, but there was a problem because getting funding, they wanted it to be terrace houses, as you can see, and getting funding for terrace houses is quite difficult, which is why they had to set up a co-housing project. So basically, there's a management company that runs the whole site, and it's people are elected onto it as directors by the community. And the parking is actually underground. So again, they've made a good job of that. I think it's an excellent scheme. I think it's really well designed. Next slide, please. By contrast, that's next door. So same environment, same kind of, I suppose, socio-economic groups and everything else. And I think, next slide, please. I know which I prefer to those in terms of design and everything else. And it's not a cost thing. It's very much about people being empowered to do their own thing and creating their own landscape and environment. And again, the shared areas, the landscape and all the areas where, again, you see they've got allotments and various things. Those are all run by the community, monitored and supervised by the community. Right, next slide, please. This is a project which actually Andrew Duran, our gracious host, was involved in and knows a lot more than I do about. So, but this is in Glasgow. It was designed to test demand and see as a kind of pilot to see what might happen and how it would go. There was a local connection test, which is very important because it means that, again, the local community, even if they're not living there, they have an ownership of it, and apparently that's been very, very well received. The legislation, I think, is slightly different in Scotland, but nevertheless it shows what can be done, and I think they've got a lot more in the pipeline. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of my own projects, which I did as an architect. Just one house, but I'll see why I'm mentioning it shortly, I hope. So this was a large area of land, quite considerable areas of land, which were divided up into separate plots. My client acquired one of them. Could I have the next slide, please? So they had a very well worked out process, which, again, I'm not going to go into the exact detail here, but it was very tightly timetabled. So you had a time within which you had to complete the project. There were plot passports that set out the limitations and possibilities, the areas you could build on, and everything else. The submission for approval, which was interesting to me as an architect, was an A1 sheet in colour with everything on it. So all the design, the plans, the elevations, materials, whatever, all on one sheet. They have a weekly meeting, and they checked it, and if it was in accordance with the design code, it was almost certainly going to get approved. But there's a 3-week kind of period for people to object if anyone wanted to. Nobody did for mine, thank you, just as well. Next slide, please. So this is the finished project, the finished house, which was, I suppose, more on the grand designs line than some of the others that I've shown you. But nevertheless, it was done by a family. They built their own house. They designed it with me. We went through the whole process and produced a house which they were really very happy with. Now, some of you who are paying attention might have noticed I haven't said where this is. The other thing I haven't said is when it is. Can I have the next slide, please? So where is it? It's in Milton Keynes. But when was it? It was 1996. So this was being done, the exact things that we've been talking about was being done like 30 years ago, and quite successfully. Can you see the next slide, please? So good excuse doing this talk. I thought, right, I'll go back and see how it's doing. So I had a wander around, took some pictures, and it's really very, very nice. The way that it's worked is just how they planned. The landscape has matured, which always helps. But you've got all these individual houses, all individual designs. Next slide, please. But they are a cohesive whole because of the way the whole process was managed. So if you want to see the end result and how successful this kind of approach to design and developing houses can be, I'd say have a wander around some parts of Milton Keynes. This area, the one I did, was in an area called Caldecott, for those of you who know Milton Keynes. Right, so yes, just one more thing before we finish. Can I have the next slide, please? Here's a contrast. While I was busy doing that in Milton Keynes, about the same sort of time, in Leeds, again in Chapeltown, this project was coming to fruition. Now this is basically, it was a deprived area. It was a row of houses that were falling down in disrepair. Nobody wanted them. This group got together, and they had basic DIY skills, I think, nothing more. But they all came from backgrounds where they were struggling to afford decent homes. What they did, to cut a long story short, was they created these houses that you can see in the pictures. So they built them pretty much using what I would call sweat equity, their labour. And the end result was that they were tenants, but the sweat equity got them 25% part ownership of those properties. And some of them, all these years later, are still occupied by the same people. They have slightly been caught in a trap, which is the cruelty of the property market, in that they were so successful, the value of the properties has gone up. So they've got their part ownership and they can't afford to buy the rest of it because these houses are now worth like £200,000-300,000. But nevertheless, it shows what can be achieved and what is possible. Next slide, please. So in summary, just quickly, because I'm aware time is running on, this can't be done using the traditional methods of planning controls and sticking to them rigidly. It needs some innovation, and it needs perhaps a bit of letting go. What's not in the design code is as important as what's in, because that's the bit where you give freedom, and that's where the joy comes for the self-builders. It's all about working out what's important to the council and then what's important to the self-build, and reaching a kind of midpoint, or a point where both sides are happy and you can get good results. The documents don't have to be endlessly lengthy, particularly if you decide you're going to give the self-builders more freedom, because basically if you have a site where you give them a lot of freedom, they all know that's what's going to happen. So they're not going to start objecting to each other's schemes, because they all know that's what they took up when they went for the site. So yeah, it's all about striking a balance and making sure that all sides are get the best out of the project. And the end result, when it's done well, as hopefully I've shown you, is you get some fantastic housing developments, which I don't think could have been achieved any other way. So just final thought, really. I know we're talking about all sorts of complicated policies and documents and everything else, but this is about people. It's about community, building communities. It's about creating what I'd call joyful places rather than just adequate places where people exist. You know, they have a house because they've got to have a house. This is about creating homes and places that people will treasure and enjoy living in. Thank you. So I'll now hand over to Angie, I think.
Thanks very much, Julian. And thank you very much for your presentation, and also to Honoré as well. Honoré, can I just ask you to join us again and put your camera back on? We're now going to go over to a Q&A session. We're going to look at, we had lots of amazing questions, so thank you very much for posting your questions in the chat. We probably won't have time to answer all of them. Well, we definitely won't have time to answer all of them because there's been lots, but we will do our best to answer some of them, and we will maybe come back to the chat at a later date as well to answer them as well. So first of all, just to mention that there's task force, Right to Build task force guidance available for some of the questions that have been asked already. The question on BNG, there's a specific BNG masterclass by Diversity Net Game masterclass in January 2025. So that will be promoted on the Right to Build task force website. Also, the question on PINs, there is actually, I think it's been posted already in the chat, that there's guidance available for that one as well. So check out the Right to Build task force website for more information on that. And also there was a question on affordable self and custom build. The last local government capacity centre presentation that we did on self and custom build was actually about affordable. So you should be able to find that actually on YouTube from our previous one. So that might be of interest to people to check out. Okay, so over to the questions. First of all, I think we'll maybe kind of kick it off with, there was a lot of people asking about definitions of custom build. And while I'm aware that we could talk about that for probably 3 weeks rather than the amount of time we've got right now, I thought I'd pass it over to you both to see what's your definition of what custom build is. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Honoré, do you want to?
I will answer that question not as a planner, but as a designer. And I think for me, self-build is that you actually take almost all the decision in the design process. You know, buying the land and appointing the contractors, the designers, and actually making many of the decisions. If it's custom built, it's almost like a package of options where you choose what is something you make some choices internally and externally, but you're not in control of the whole design process. It's almost it's like defined design options, and I think that's the way I would like to see it. I think it's interesting because sometimes custom build will be seen that you choose the kind of kitchen or the kind of parts of the furniture or the bathroom. For me, that is not custom built. You know, it has to go a step further. You have a say about the layout. You probably should have a say about some of the items in the facade as well. Because it should go a step further. But that's the definition for me as a designer, not as a planner.
And that example I showed in Waterlily is there for the reasons I was explaining, to do with finance and everything else. They did have to have control and I suppose a company creating the shells, although they did as part of that, they allowed people to choose where the windows went. Internally, people had complete freedom. And actually, I think one of the kind of potentially more successful even possibilities with this is that you have a shell, which might be a new building or it might be an existing one. And actually, you give people, we saw this with Honoré when we went to Amsterdam and he took us around. There was a school which was divided up into sections. So there was no internal planning. They just said, well, this is your bit of the school, your unit. And then people were free to do whatever they wanted within that. So there's a lot of definitions, but I think it's almost defined as much by what it isn't as what it is. Like Honoré said, if it's just kitchens and bathrooms, that is not self-build.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's got to be that primary input, hasn't there, from that end user into design and layout. That's what quite a lot of people use as a definition, isn't it? But it can be done within existing buildings as well as building from scratch. So, okay, thank you for kicking off the discussion on that. I'm going to ask a wee individual one for both of you now. So, first of all, Honoré, there was a question on someone who'd said it was great to see self-build terraced townhouses in Dutch examples. My impression is that this doesn't happen in the UK, and instead self-build here tends to be big detached houses for rich people. How can we get more variety of house types and open self-building to people in moderate incomes? This is the kind of grand designs question, isn't it? Is it like grand designs? Is it not? So over to you, Honoré.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I've been part of the task force since 8 years. And I think this is a message we try to get across. I mean, there's still the perception that it's only the 4 or 5 bedroom homes, and I think it's just not a reality in many parts of the world. I think firstly, just the perception needs to change, and then secondly, maybe the council should be more proactive about demanding certain house types through the planning system for 2 or 3 bedroom houses. I mean, the developers I have worked with and the landowners, they were very keen to diversify. And this was also to kind of reduce risk, to have a much wider range of customers. This, it's not, sometimes it could work against you if you have a site like Orchard Farm of 100 homes and they're all the same types of houses with the same plots. It's not the case, but if it was, then there's a very small segment of the market you approach. I think it's good to see it in a much more positive way and turn it around and diversify. And the system with design codes and plot passports allows for a much wider range of types, because you're not relying on these house builders who want to build the same houses again and again. That is often not the case. Bring variation and choice, and is in a way much easier within customer sale. But also if the market is changing, if there's an economic downturn, maybe the 2-3 bedroom houses are very popular, And actually, to diversify, I think it's just a way forward. Of course, it depends on the location and the specific site conditions from an economic point of view. But I think it should work for the more urban sites as well. Small urban sites. I live in London. The garage sites are they're ideal to redevelop for custom and self-build. And they're small sites. There will be small houses up to 2-3 bedrooms. So I think there's plenty of opportunities there.
Okay,
can I just add to that? Sorry, Angie. I just wanted to add to that. I feel quite passionate about this. It should be accessible to people who are going for shared ownership or renting or on lower incomes. It should be accessible, but those examples which I showed, they all depended very much on the councils. I mean, you know that better than anyone, don't you? It needs the councils to support it. In terms of particularly in acquiring land and enabling. So it doesn't necessarily mean the council have to spend ages on it and work it all out. That can be done by others, but it needs the I suppose the drive and the enthusiasm of the council to make it happen. And it's a cultural thing. We've just shown it's perfectly possible to do it. Perfectly possible. It's just in this country it's a different culture and we're not used to the idea. It sounds all very radical. Which it isn't at all, as Honoré has explained.
Can I just add something to Julian's comment, because I think this is happening. I mentioned the tiny homes. I mean, it was a small project in Almere 5 years ago. One of our colleagues in the task force wrote a book about it. Now, local councils have made land available across the Netherlands to build these small homes for starters and people who want to scale down. So, and it's happening, and the land is not always sold. There's maybe more different construction with lease of the land, but actually it is happening. And I think Julian is right. The local council is the driving force there, they have made it happen, and there's many of these sites now.
Yeah, more examples coming forward all the time, isn't there? Thank you very much. One for you, Julian. Could you explain about achieving maintenance of large open spaces, landscape areas shown in the examples given, please? I think that was actually your examples, Honoré, but Julian, if you don't mind.
Yes, yeah, I mean, Honoré, we work at different ends of the spectrum, Honoré and I, so or is it the other side of the coin? I'm not sure. But anyway, on the smaller scale, the important thing is that because it's evolved the community has evolved with the buildings, they do have that sense of ownership that's very strong. I suppose on a much bigger scale, Honoré actually would be able to answer that better than me, but I imagine it's a similar situation where things are adopted by the council where possible, and where they aren't, there's a management company that will see to it.
Do you want to add anything, Honoré?
So this is about the public space. This is a question about public space, the management. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I mean, space. My experience is, for the bigger schemes I have been involved in, the legal construction. I'm not part of the legal team, but it was actually to hand over the freehold and the freehold to the residents, and put the structure in place, and then they take over. If the land is adopted by the council, of course, then the council will maintain it. But that's, of course, that's the dialogue with the local council as well. And maybe some parts of the public spaces will be handed over to the council, and some of them will be managed, by the community. In Orchard Farm, there were 7 yards we introduced. Each of the yards could be managed by the local community who lives around the yard. These are things we have explored during the development process. So I think there's different models there.
Yeah, community stewardship's a really interesting thing as well. I think it's becoming more and more popular, isn't it? A question again for both your thoughts on this one. This was around transport planning, and it got quite a lot of reactions actually. So a transport planner, I'm assuming, posted this question. All these examples are really good. However, as officers, highways, how do we give weight to schemes where parking is a requirement and no parking spaces are provided as shown in the examples? If parking isn't provided, schemes are unlikely to be supported and approved by members of planning committee. This is the whole thing about, having cars. What is the relationship between cars and developments? So your thoughts on that, both of you. I don't know who wants to go first.
I want to pitch again here. I work on projects aside from custom and self-build and one-off houses, and it depends on the location. So we've done a project quite recently with some apartments, and there were 38 apartments, but there was only 4 spaces. The highways, we're quite happy with that because it was right next to the tram in Nottingham. There were good connections with local facilities, etc., etc. So it's a kind of broader question, I suppose, than just custom and self-build, but you do have this facility to have shared car schemes, which work extremely well because, in the right context and with a community, they make it a condition of, well, if you come in with our self-build, custom build project, you have got to agree to a number of things, one of which is that you car share. And it's great from all sorts of reasons. It frees up more landscape, and it also means it's more sustainable and it's more affordable as well. So there's ways around it aside from what normally happens anyway in larger developments, in my experience.
You want to add anything to that, Honoré?
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, the parking. I think our relation with parking spaces and cars has been changed. I live in in Zone 2, Central London, or next to Central London. We don't have allocated parking spaces, and I live here for almost 10 years. I don't think I hear anybody complaining about it. That has changed already. If you look at the scheme in New Leiden, you didn't see any cars because the cars were resolved within the blocks. There were very tight urban blocks, and the parking was resolved within the block. That was at a time where we still expected the parking space on a very central location. That has changed as well in the Netherlands. We don't have to provide 1 or 2 parking spaces for each house. And I think if I go back to the UK, for an example, the project in Orchard Farm, we were working with parking policies who are actually probably not updated in the expectation we have now with electric bicycles and other ways of transport. As Orchard Farm, our approach was we resolve as much of parking on the plot, and some of the bigger types of houses had 3 or 4 parking spaces, but I'm not sure if that's really required, but that was the policy. But what we did also as well, we took all the parking out of the lanes and the public space, and then we had clusters of parking. This it was on the plot, and clusters of parking spread around the community. And that was the way we tried to kind of take the cars out of that streetscape, out of these yards. And it was a very important approach. also, I mean, I talked about connecting with other people. That means that sometimes you walk to your car, but it's slightly further parked away. And that's a moment where you actually engage and meet and are part of it, of that moment in the public realm. And again, you know, these were the parking numbers. We tried to make the best out of it and try to work with it. And I think that was an approach as an example.
Great, thank you. Honor, that project in New Leiden's amazing. It's the cars are underground, aren't they, under the actual houses, so it frees up that space for the children to play, for people to interact with each other. It's just a lovely development. Right, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm just trying to work out what's the last question I can ask you. What about maybe something about the cultural shift towards meaningful levels of custom self-build. What do you think we need to do in this country to change our mindset to kind of like change things? I know it's a $1 million question, so thoughts on that one for the last few minutes, please.
I think it's very straightforward. As I said earlier, I think the councils have to embrace it. I think, you know, I've worked with quite a few different councils over the years, and some of them are more open to these kind of things than others. But ultimately, it is a cultural change. And I think it's partly because of the mindset maybe local authorities have, which is everything has to be controlled. You have to control the last detail. In fact, it's about letting go and reaching that balance between making sure that things that don't go crazy, but on the other hand, people get the chance to express their individuality. And that it can only come from the councils, in my opinion, because without the encouragement, support and kind of resources that the council can bring to something like that, it's not going to happen, because the elephant in the room here is the juggernaut that is the large house builders, who have a very, you know, they do what they do very well and they don't want to change it. So the only way to change that is for councils to work with their communities and drive it forward.
Henri, last thoughts on that one?
No, I think, you know, I mean, there's many ways you can answer this question, but I think, and I've been working custom and self-built in the UK and the Netherlands. I think it is about, if you want to scale up, I think you need to understand what the process is and really kind of optimize the process. And we have seen that in as an example in Amsterdam. We have seen it in Graven Hill. The moment you understand the process, then you can streamline it, and you know how to prepare the design codes and the plot passport and the contracts. Then actually, if you share that template, then you can roll it out very quickly as a local council. Yeah. And actually, you can only make it viable if you are in control of the process, I think. So you have the land maybe available, you make it available, and you can deliver within the time scales. And I think that's something, you know, to kind of make it mainstream. That's something I think that should have a massive push. And maybe through pilot projects. You know, I'm very much believe in more pilot projects. I'm not seeing happening enough at the moment. I mean, I've been involved in them, but very often it was driven by the private sector, most of them, not all of them. But actually, these pilot projects are so good, and I know there's enough organizations who would support them. So if it happens, then other projects will follow. I mean, this is what I have seen, you know, in other parts of the world. Because the moment they are built, they are very popular, and they want to have more of them. But if they're not built, you know, we don't have the reference, and not enough references at the moment in the UK, and I think that really should change.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you both of you for your amazing presentations. I think we're just going to go back onto slideshow for some wrap-up messages. So thanks for all the attendees today, and thank you to Julian and Henri as well for your amazing presentations. So thank you everyone as well for attending. This is our slide of take-home messages, which will be emailed out to you. You don't have to try and read it just now. So we've put together some take-home messages, and we'll try and also get to some questions that we haven't answered in the chat so far. Also, can I ask please that you take part in our poll, just to give an idea of, has this session been useful to you? Has it increased your understanding? So if you wouldn't mind taking a second to do that, and also give us an idea of what you would like us to cover in future sessions, because we are here within Homes England to try and help you, and you know, we would like to hear from you what you would like us to cover, so that we can try and do that for you. Next slide, please. So anything you want to know, just you can email us out at this number, or contact us at Homes England. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended today. And you know, we hope to see you again at one of our future sessions. Thank you very much.